Welcome to Cultural Fluency Makers. I'm your host, David Wellish. Each week, we welcome leaders to share how they stay ahead of the ever-changing consumer landscape. With today's cultural transformation, top brands need to understand diverse consumer segments from Gen Z, Hispanic, and LGBTQ+ to gamers, wine enthusiasts, and basketball fanatics in Iowa. Their marketing strategies require them to keep the pulse on their consumers, but also their brand in the category to continue to grow revenue for the long term. Cultural Fluency Makers is sponsored by Collage Group, the only cultural intelligence engine that provides brand and consumer insights on the why that drives consumer behavior and purchase decisions. Let's get started. I am so excited for this episode and really look forward to a dynamic and an insightful dialogue. With me today is an accomplished business leader whose career spans a wealth of experience across global, regional, and US domestic roles. Known for her dynamic and innovative approach, she has a unique ability to see the big picture while honing in on the details that drive success. With a strong focus on communication, she excels in selecting, inspiring, and coaching winning teams that push boundaries and achieve extraordinary results. She's a marketing expert who has worked for top brands such as Avon, the Heineken Company, National Mango Brand, True Leaf, and so many more. Today, she's the Vice President of North America Marketing for condiments and sauces at McCormick and Company. Valda Coryat, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, David. As you were reading that intro, I was wondering, who is that person that he's talking about?
That is you.
I almost
That
don't
is you.
recognize myself.
I know I am, and our audience will be really excited to learn from you today. Should we get started?
Absolutely.
Valda?
Let's do it.
Let's do this. So Valda, given America's rapidly changing demographic and cultural landscape,
Mhm.
what role do you think inclusive marketing plays in your overall marketing strategy, marketing approach?
Yeah, so it's one of those things that the changing landscape happened so naturally and organically, right? We almost didn't see it coming per se, in the sense that I think as people go to the grocery store and they visit restaurants, they're tasting new things and may not have even known the name for it. And before you know it, everyone's hooked, right, on that michelada or that mangonada, for example. And so the changing landscape is critical to what I would say is brand and business longevity, right, and success, not only near term but long term. And it affects every single aspect of our marketing strategy, from the insights that you get from consumers, the creation of those strategies, all the way through how we recruit for some of those studies to get the insights, including gathering data from multiple sources. How are we interpreting the data? What is not only what is said but spoken, but what is unspoken? So I think we're in a really dynamic time. It makes it really interesting, right, for marketers and for businesses. I think that's why we get out of bed every day to continue to do the work that we do, because there's always a challenge, but it's a beautiful challenge.
Um, you've been in this industry for a long time. I have as well. And pendulums change. They go from
Hmm.
one to the other to the what how do you see this area evolving? Like what happens to marketing? What happens to whatever label you want to put it? Is it
Hmm.
multicultural marketing? Is it
Hmm.
inclusive marketing? How has it evolved? How do you see it evolving?
Oh, wow. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. When I started in marketing, I actually worked for Colgate Palmolive, right?
Uh,
Colgate, Palmolive.
Colgate, yes.
Yeah, Colgate.
I mean,
And
as an Ecuadorian, I grew up con Colgate.
a lot of people around the world have, right? And one of the things that I remember during that time, I think that how we created our marketing plans and strategies fit in neater, tidier boxes. So there was a discrete sort of Hispanic marketing. There was a discrete, African American or marketing to Black Americans. And so we had agencies that we would go to, again, discreetly for that. And then you had your general market. So I remember having three different plans, right? A lot of it made sense because of the media that was being consumed by those audiences. And certainly some of the events, like going down to Miami for Calle Ocho and so forth. But fast forward to today, right? I'm working now for McCormick, and a brand like Cholula, which was born in Mexico, still made in Mexico, actually a really strong base of consumers that we have are not at all Mexican of any generation, right? And so the evolution that I see is, how are marketers really becoming more sophisticated, right? To take brands that may have a core that is ethnic, but certainly appeals more broadly to a broader consumer base. How are you leveraging that, right? How are you speaking to that multicultural audience? How are you speaking to multiple generations in a way that is authentic and resonates equally, right, with the acculturated Hispanic or acculturated Mexican who is proud of their origins and their roots, and they certainly probably speak more Spanish when they're home, right, for holidays with the family. But then they've got friends, who may not speak Spanish at all that really enjoy Mexican cuisine. So that to me is what I've seen. And it's not to say that people didn't always eat a variety of foods. I'm not, oversimplifying it that way. But I would say from a business perspective and from a marketing perspective, I think we're watching certainly the younger millennial and Gen Z and certainly Gen Alpha, consumer bases, they are far ahead. And I think some of the casting decisions even that we made, right, in the past, you know, they may not see that as authentic. So you really have to stay on your toes and figure out, for your brand and for your growth targets, how do you make sure that you capture the greatest consumer base that is available to buy your product?
And uh, Valda, so well said. You're talking about the crossover
Mm-hmm,
space, which is such a massive opportunity.
mm-hmm.
And I think that it's really driven by the fact that the younger generations, not only are they so much more open, but they want this sort of ethnic and authentic cuisine.
That's right.
That's a massive business opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So how fun that
Yeah.
you got these brands to play with. So how important is this for consumer organizations to get this right, to get the sort of multiculturalism, and how mission critical, and would you say it is for, again, consumer organizations to get this right?
Yeah, it's critical to their success, right? And their longer term growth. And I think that is regardless of who your historical consumer base is, or maybe even who your current base is. And the reason I say that, again, it's not a one size fits all, right? Every brand does not have the DNA and the, uh, you know, um, I would say loyal base of consumers that Cholula does. But even if you were to take another brand, I'll call out, let's say, French's mustard, right, which is seen as a very American flavor, or our McCormick spices, for example, right? McCormick's a 135-year-old company. Um, certainly everyone bakes. Certainly, many use mustard in some recipes or not. And even if I take it away from food, um, you have a core, but over time, right, people's eating habits change maybe for various reasons. You may find obviously some of your consumer base as they age are sort of dying out as well. Unfortunately, it happens, life happens. And so, when you quantify, though, the large percentage where the growth is,
The growth.
right, in consumer base, it is absolutely multicultural. The census data shows us this. The census data is, we also can look at economic data and see the buying power of this younger, more multi-ethnic, consumer base. So it's absolutely critical to the viability of businesses long term, and everyone has to make, the right decisions, right, for maintaining their existing and their loyal consumers as they grow.
And what we're very privileged and honored to be working with more than 300 brands across so many different categories. And I think what we see sometimes is this tension. Everybody
Hmm.
knows the demographic growth, so that's
That's
not
right.
a secret. I think the competing approaches are, everybody does their own segmentation, right? As a
Hmm.
brand,
That's
whether you
right.
call it demand spaces or
Hmm.
consumer mindsets or whatever it may be, and then you've got the demographic overlay.
Hmm.
How do you think about that? Is demographic its own thing, or how does it play into however a brand is looking at their own personas?
Yeah, no, demographic is a component, right? The demographics are one thing. So if you were to, I'm going to use my son, right? If you were to take him, he probably would be categorized as African American, right? For the most part, but with our Caribbean roots, people may not know how much the music that he consumes, right, is very Latin. Having grown up for the most part in Orlando, Florida, he will use terms like no, oh, that he's a no sabo kid, like, and I'm saying, Mr. Quinlan, you're not a native, you weren't born in Venezuela. So how are you able to call somebody a no sabo kid? Um, and I'm using this anecdote because when you look at statistics, right, and you look at a household, it may be based on head of household. That head of
Yeah,
household may be Gen X, but the Gen Z or Gen Alpha children in that household are absolutely influencing buying patterns. They have their own money that they are purchasing things and bringing it into the home, and then a reverse influence, right, to their parents, things that
sure.
their parents may not have been interested in. If you only look at demographics, you would miss the contextual. You may
Yeah,
know what's happening, but you don't know the why it's happening. And you don't
yeah.
know who or what is influencing the changes that are occurring with your brand by that psychographic or by that demographic. And so we are really employing, I would say, a lot of different tools, some traditional, some untraditional. The other thing that I encourage people to do, get out of the building, get out of your house. One of the best learnings that I got were in two places, right? So I started traditional CPG, but going to work for Avon, which is a direct selling model, it is not read by Nielsen, it is not read by Circana or IRI, right? And likewise, I would say, even now with mayonesa, right? Majority of, 50% of the mayonesa sales that we have are in unmeasured channels. So if you're only looking at the data, or roughly 50%, if you're only looking at the data that you have access to, you actually are missing a lot of the consumption, the purchase, the usage of many products. I mentioned mayonesa, but I'm telling that those the Avon, the direct selling piece for me was again one of the biggest learnings for me as a commercial lead, right, in a direct selling channel. And then I could incorporate, for example, I worked in agricultural marketing for about a few years as well, working on the National Mango Board. Fascinating because when you are, again, dealing with a commodity, right? And again, it's sold, yes, at your produce section in major grocery stores and so forth. But guess what? I don't know if you've ever been in New York, you ever see the ladies on the side that are peeling the mango, chopping it, putting it into the plastic bag? I know maybe most people don't want to buy those, but guess what? A lot of people do buy it and they eat it and they're just fine. And there's mango consumption that is happening again in places that you can't read.
So that's great. You context matters, depth matters. We at
Absolutely.
Collage talk a lot about the why. I mean, that's
Hmm.
what we're the why behind
Hmm.
the data and so forth. In addition to data, Valda, what's hard about this? In some ways, you would say, "Gosh," to your point, Hispanic America is driving the growth of most categories.
Hmm.
And for sure, if you open the aperture and you go multiculturals,
Hmm.
I mean, they're driving the growth. And
Hmm.
yet, some companies do it, other companies don't really do much. in the categories where it is really clear, the data is clear. So what's hard? What do you think is challenging?
What's challenging is how do you determine, as they say, a hockey analogy, right? How do you skate to where the puck is going and how fast? So I think the hard part is we live in more of a world where we are measuring or evaluating certainly for-profit companies on a quarterly basis, and we're making
Yeah,
decisions against that. We prepare annual marketing plans, right? And then certainly sometimes we have longer term plans that look 3, maybe 5 years out. But the decisions that are made on the quarterly and the annual basis actually really affect the trajectory. So, what you can, make the case for
yeah,
today, is may not equate to what is actually going to help you grow. And sometimes there's some sacrifices that need to be made. It's an investment, is what I'm saying, right? So you
yeah,
may not get that immediate ROI, that immediate payout. Again, I go back to I mentioned Coyote. So the brands that invested in events, events may not show you the greatest ROI, but
yeah,
guess what? If your brand is not showing up there, right? With the people, as I like to say. Even if I take it away from Coyote, I was at, college football games, right? And I go to ones I guess you would call sort of the big ones, right? The big general market ones, but I've also gone to HBCU college football games. The richness of the engagement there for the brands that are on site and for the brands that sponsor cannot be replicated. I won't name the competitor, but there's one major competitor of another brand that is within my portfolio. They had a tent, and my son spotted it, and of course, good kid. So he goes, "Hey, ma, guess who's here?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, take a picture for me," And he took the picture.
huh.
And I was like, shucks, like we're not there, right? It's a competitor of Frank's Red Hot. So it's one of those things. I think what's hard is as you're appealing to this, newer demographics for many brands,
Yeah.
are you willing to, take a leap and a risk maybe versus what your historical ROI models told you will give you the payback? There's a healthy tension there in a debate because certainly every dollar matters and we want to get the best return. But again, we're talking about that longer term value. How do people become so entrenched and so loyal that even when another brand or a store brand copycats your formula, right? And they're selling it at $1 less, right? Or $2 less. My God. How do they still reach for yours, right? That sort of longer term loyalty that people carry, have certainly go beyond a coupon and an impression, right? In the media mix.
I mean, that's what branding is all about,
Hmm.
right? That's the whole right. That's what marketing is about.
Yes. Yeah.
It's giving it personality and connecting and authentically resonating.
Hmm.
So, I've had the privilege of moderating this last year a bunch of roundtables
Hmm.
with marketing leaders, and when we discussed this notion of cultural relevance, we call it, as you know, cultural
Hmm.
fluency.
Hmm.
um, we say, is it important to be culturally relevant to win hearts and minds of today's consumers? The answer is like 100. Everybody goes, gosh,
Hmm.
priority one, two, or three, like really, really important. Um, for you, Valda, how do you define being culturally relevant or culturally fluent, and how do you get there?
Oh, wow. Um, I love culturally fluent, by the way.
Thank
Relevant
you.
is almost a fact, it's checking a box that you have shown that you're aware of something. A fluency gives you an ease with which you blend and you mix and you go in and out of, right? There is a difference, I would say, between you know, Spanglish and the use of Spanish and English
Yep. It's a
thoughtfully.
great, great, great example. It's a great example.
Okay, so yeah, so oftentimes, I mean, some people will frown on Spanglish, but again, there's a difference, you know. And do you know what that is, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so I love the notion of fluency. I inherently I always have to bring back my Caribbean roots because I am a child of the Caribbean, a family that speaks multiple languages, fluently, Spanish and French and Dutch, etc. And one of the things, again, I go back to food is the easiest thing for me to draw a parallel to.
Yeah.
Mangoes, oh my God. It's even though the majority that come to the US come from Mexico, every country in the world that grows mangoes think that their mango is the best. You know?
Ours in Ecuador was the best. What
Yeah,
do you?
yeah. You talk to people from India, they're like, no, we're the king of
It's
mangoes,
ours. It's
It's ours,
yeah.
right? There's mango stories. The same is true of peppers, right? I'll give you a cultural fluency example. Salsa macha, right? In Mexico is effectively the same as chili crisp, right? An Asian consumer. Very,
Yeah.
very close, right? So as you are, a food company and you're developing things, right? Or a flavor like tamarind, very much found also in Asian cuisine. It is not just tamarindo, you know, it's a
Yeah.
flavor
Yeah.
that is recognizable. There's an imprint that's left. So, that notion of fluency is when people are so comfortable that they see the connections, right? Whether it's in flavor, in format of food, whether it's in how people interact with the elders in their family, you actually then can get to some really strong, I would say, resonance with
Yeah.
consumers across racial and ethnic lines because of those very real, like human truths, right? Or similarities that you tap into. And that's the part for me that is like, I think part of the reason I came into business via brand management is, well, one, I left the Caribbean and missed some of the brands and things that I remember as a child tasting. But besides that, there's the possibility almost for marketing to play like this higher level unifier, right? If you love coffee, right? Coffee shops via Starbucks became so popular. They became almost like places that any and everybody could just go and take a break and sip their coffee or whatever and enjoy it. It's no different than when I'm in Miami, right, and I get my cafe con leche. Like there's a social aspect to
Or
enjoying the flavor of that drink, and a larger company of course tapped into that and blew it out across the world. But that for me is cultural fluency, right? So again, I'm mentioning Starbucks, but I'm also mentioning cafe con leche. I'm saying the
yeah.
difference between Spanglish and the thoughtful use of Spanish and English in your marketing, on your labels, etc. Or the flavor of tamarind, tamarindo, or chili crisp and salsa macha. Like there's so many things that are, call it crossover appeal, right? And if you're
Yes.
culturally fluent, you more easily recognize that and action against it. And I think the companies who have built that muscle either by hiring people on staff or working with agencies, right, like yours, who can help us along that journey, actually will win the greatest share of the consumers' hearts, minds, and probably wallets as well.
And wallets. So nicely said. We believe that cultural fluency ought to be a top five corporate priority,
Mm-hmm.
given the American landscape. And I love as you explain it. The word that I was thinking about was effortless. You made it sound,
Absolutely.
like effortless, like this, like beautiful, effortless, sort of magical. But behind the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
to get to that effortless state,
Mm-hmm.
gosh, you gotta spend and invest in insights
Yes,
deeply to get to
absolutely.
effortless, right? No different than artists or performers. When you
Mm-hmm.
Where you see them performing effortlessly, the practice that was critical to get them
Hmm.
to getting them there was so critical.
Hmm.
That's great. One we also see this tension of at a time when budgets, gosh, are so tight everywhere, and ROI is so critical, and CFOs are measuring every penny. How do you balance this notion of targeted communication and messaging versus just a holistic approach to target the overall market?
Mm, okay. I think that there is an opportunity, and what I try to do, right, is show the roadmap, David. It's a getting, internal stakeholders to align on today, right? And actually it's a bit of ensuring that they believe in the future path and those stepping stones, right, to get there. So it's a framing of a vision against, real metrics, and then the near term quantifying, honestly, the lost opportunity if we don't
Uh,
do this.
that's great. So that's
Mhm.
effective, the opportunity cost.
It is.
It seems like you're talking about a phased approach. Like this is phase one, phase two, phase
Mhm.
three. What are
Yeah.
we doing now? But where is it? But where is it going?
And how does it ladder, right? Because what we're doing now, I'm not a fan of one and done. Like, okay, we launched it, it was great, we did it in this year, and then you abandon. And it's like, okay, so then it fails and people are wondering why. It has to be a cumulative
Yeah.
effect, cumulative support in order to build.
Gosh, there's so much complexity, right? As
Mhm.
America gets more diverse, fragmented, polarized, complexity just rises. Backlash has been a theme. If you're winning with some, you're probably
Mhm.
losing somewhere else. I don't know if you have a perspective on this AI. Like, what is it going to make it easier or more difficult?
It depends is the answer. I think AI, everyone has to, you should already be there. Let's just start with that. Because if you're not, you're late. And how we interact with AI actually shapes the evolution of AI, right? And that's important also from a language perspective, right? For all of my non-Spanish speakers, as well, Spanish speaking family and friends. Um, the reality, though, I would say is, for corporations or businesses, you have to figure out how you leverage it that all in a way that also protects your competitive advantage. So, it's a depends because you actually will probably need some people dedicated to AI in your organization to figure it out for you because it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, and we're early.
I don't want to be the person who didn't believe cell phones were going to be popular, right? And then all of a sudden you're out of business. Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. Valda, this is great. Really appreciate your perspective. And you had
Mhm.
such a great trajectory in so many different roles at such great companies and different categories. So we this part we're learning from you, and now we're going to learn a little bit about you. So let's get a little more personal. So what inspires you? What motivates you?
Oh, things like music and art, and those are the things that I feel like I'm not thinking as much. Really capture my heart, and I think from that, it shows up in other ways as I'm doing my work. So I'm inspired, honestly, by the younger generation. All three of my children, I say I raised three great humans. They're all three very different, have their own unique interests, personalities, etc. But I I love to listen to, I may not always agree, but how they view the world. you know, them and their friends have actually made me want to get out of bed every morning and make sure that I'm actually there to see it. Right. So it's been really fun being a mom. And aside from young people, my children included, I'm also inspired, interestingly, by the oldest. generation as well. I was very close to my grandmother. I talk about her a lot. I actually was part of a fireside chat this week, and I told the story, but about my grandmother, her life, and her impact on the family. And I think what's interesting is some of the things that were integral to her day to day. I see them coming back. So
That's
remember, I
so
talked
interesting.
about that universality, right?
Yes, yes.
It has taken some decades, right? But I hear and see some of the lessons I learned from her in her life coming back full circle with this younger generation.
Wow, I love the sort of two bookends. Yeah, that's I mean you have an incredible way of sort of learning from those around you. I
Hmm.
also have we also have three kids, and I would totally agree with you. They teach you so much.
Yeah. Yes,
They
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 do.
teach you so much. That's wonderful. Well, Valda, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I enjoyed our discussion about the role of inclusive marketing and cultural fluency in the longevity and the success of brands and the need for authentic engagement if brands want to win hearts and minds of diverse consumers. Thank you to our audience as well. This was another exciting episode of Cultural Fluency Makers. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Cultural Fluency Makers. Thank you for joining us. Please share your comments and what you would like to hear more about. Be as specific as possible. For show notes and more, please visit culturalfluencymakers.com. This show is proudly sponsored by Collage Group, unleashing the power of cultural intelligence to fuel brand growth. Please follow Collage Group on LinkedIn, and we will see you next week.